Hello everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel Education Plus Arena. In last video we saw about some CSS property like CSS border, CSS padding and CSS margin. In this video we will see about what is a class attribute and what is an ID attribute, how to use the class attribute and how to use ID attribute with example. So the first concept is ID attribute, which is very important. The HTML ID attribute is used to specify a unique ID for an HTML element. You cannot have more than one element with the same ID name. It means an ID attribute will give the style to that particular element where you have applied the ID attribute. ID attribute is also used by JavaScript to access and manipulate the element with a specific ID. Now we will see about how to use an ID attribute. So first you give your attribute name. After that, write a unique ID in the attribute value. For example, ID equals to P1. So P1 is a unique ID for my heading element. Now the syntax to access the ID attribute is first write a hash character followed by the ID name and then define the CSS in curly braces. Now I'll show you one example. So as you can see, I have written 6 paragraphs and now I'm applying CSS for the paragraph. So color I am giving red and background color I will give powder blue. And now I'll save and execute this. So this is our output. Suppose if I want to change the style of third paragraph, so I will need an ID attribute. So here in third paragraph, I'll give ID attribute. So ID equals to P01. I'm giving the ID name P01. And now I'll give the style for that particular ID. So hash character followed by my ID name P01. And now I'm giving the color green and background color I'll give black. And now I'll close the bracket. I'll save and execute this. So after refresh, you can see the style has been changed. So this is the effect of ID attribute. Now the next attribute is class attribute. So the class attribute is used to specify a class for an HTML element. Multiple elements can share the same class. So it is also like an ID attribute, but here you can apply same class attribute in multiple elements. So this is the difference between the ID attribute and the class attribute. The class attribute is often used to point a class name in style sheet. It can also be used by JavaScript to access and manipulate the elements with the specific class name. Now we will see how to use the class attribute. So first you give your attribute name and write a class name in the attribute value. Now to access the class attribute, first write a dot operator followed by the class name and then define the CSS in curly braces. You can also apply it for a particular HTML element. For that, add that particular element name before the dot operator. Now I'll show you one example. So in the previous example only, I'm adding a class attribute in the fourth paragraph. My class name is error. I'm giving the class name as error. So to access the class attribute, we need dot operator. So p dot class name error, and now I'll write the CSS in between the curly bracket. So color I am giving blue and background color I'll give black. Now I'll save and execute this. So after refresh, you can see the style has been changed of the fourth paragraph. So thanks for watching.